All right, so you wanted a deep dive on Amrita Sher-Gil. Buckle up, because her story is anything BUT basic.
Definitely not your average artist bio.
Not even close.
Yeah.
We're talking about a woman who packed a lifetime of passion and artistry and rule-breaking into just 28 years. It's almost unbelievable.
It's true. And what always gets me is how her life story isn't just some interesting side note. It's woven into the very fabric of her artwork.
Okay, so picture this. 1913 Budapest. A baby girl is born to a Hungarian Jewish opera singer and an Indian Sikh scholar.
Talk about a unique blend right from the start.
That's Amrita Sher-Gil's starting point. A fusion of cultures right there in her DNA.
And that multicultural upbringing, it becomes this constant thread in her work. It's like a dialogue between East and West playing out on her canvases. But it wasn't just her heritage that made her groundbreaking. This was a woman who lived life on her own terms, challenging social norms and artistic conventions every step of the way.
Which makes her early death at 28 all the more tragic.
It really is.
But even in that short time, she created this incredible body of work that still blows people away.
Absolutely, and that's something art historians like Path Emitter always emphasize. Sher-Gil's captivating life story, her defiance of expectations, and yes, even her tragic death all contribute to her iconic status. It's like she became a symbol of artistic rebellion and female empowerment.
So let's fast forward a bit now to 1930s Paris.
Ooh la la.
Right. Imagine Sher-Gil in this whirlwind of creativity, studying at these prestigious art schools, winning awards, even becoming the youngest associate of the Grand Salon. She stepped right into the heart of the avant-garde.
And remember, Paris in the 1930s, talk about electric. It was a haven for artists and intellectuals pushing boundaries, questioning everything.
It was the place to be.
Exactly, and this atmosphere allowed Sher-Gil to really explore her own identity, including her sexuality, with a freedom she might not have found elsewhere. She was surrounded by people who encouraged her to be her authentic self.
And she really embraced that freedom.
Yeah.
There's this amazing quote where she writes to her mother about how it's impossible to turn all her desires into art alone. She craved real-life experience, and she wasn't afraid to go after it.
And she didn't hold back. Which brings us to an important point. To truly get Sher-Gil's art, you can't separate it from her life experiences, particularly her relationships.
Yeah, the personal definitely bled into the artistic with her.
100%. She had significant relationships with both men and women, and those experiences fed directly into her artwork. It's all intertwined.
We're talking about a rumored affair with a future prime minister here.
Right. It really adds another dimension to her story.
It really does. It makes you appreciate just how intertwined her life and art really were.
And the fact that she was so open about it all. I mean, we're talking about the early 20th century, a time when a woman living so openly, embracing her bisexuality, that was radical.
It really makes you think about the courage it must have taken to be so open, especially back then. And speaking of courage, let's talk about her decision to return to India in 1933. This is where things take a really interesting turn in terms of her artistic development.
So she's fresh off her successes in Paris, right?
Exactly.
She could have stayed there in this comfortable, accepting environment.
But she doesn't.
No. She feels this pull towards India, this urge to connect with her heritage, to depict the real India she sees around her.
It's like she felt this responsibility to capture the essence of her homeland, but on her own terms.
Exactly. And this is where her relationship with the Indian art scene of the time gets a little complicated. The Bengal school was all the rage, focused on reviving traditional Indian art forms.
But that wasn't really Sher-Gil's style, was it?
Not at all. She found their work, while beautiful, somewhat, how do I put this, stagnant. She accused them of clinging to a romanticized past and ignoring the realities of a changing India. It's like she wanted to grab them by the shoulders and say, look closer, see the vibrancy, the struggles, the raw beauty of the people.
He was like a breath of fresh air.
Totally. A whirlwind of new ideas, challenging the status quo, pushing for something more modern, more relevant to the times. And this is where her interest in primitivism comes in. It wasn't just a stylistic choice, it was a deliberate move to challenge the established art scene and forge her own path.
Okay, so for those of us who aren't art historians, can you break down what primitivism actually means in this context?
Sure. Essentially, it was this movement that drew inspiration from non-Western art forms, often seen as more primitive or less refined by the European art establishment. Think bold colors, simplified forms, a rawness that went against the polished traditions of the time.
So she's taking this Western artistic concept and using it to express her vision of India.
Precisely. And it wasn't just a superficial borrowing either. She saw a parallel between the raw, expressive qualities of primitivism and the India she wanted to capture. An India that wasn't romanticized or idealized, but real and full of life and all its complexities.
And you can really see this influence in her self-portraits, especially self-portrait as a Tahitian. It's like she's taking cues from Gauguin, another artist who is drawn to primitivism, but she's making it her own, you know?
Yeah. Absolutely. And this is just the beginning of her artistic evolution. Sher-Gil was constantly experimenting, pushing boundaries, fusing Western techniques with Indian themes and sensibilities. She was a woman on a mission to create a style that was both modern and distinctly her own. And let's not forget, this is a woman who lived life on her own terms. Returning to India wasn't just about painting a different landscape, it was about immersing herself in a culture that was both familiar and in many ways still new to her.
And a culture that, let's be honest, wasn't always so welcoming to women who dared to break the mold, especially women who openly embraced their desires like Sher-Gil did.
Exactly. And her personal life, particularly her relationships with women, really adds another layer to understanding her work.
Speaking of which, her letters from her time in Paris are just incredible, so revealing. There's one where she talks about her relationship with this Hungarian pianist, Edith Lang, and she describes this intense need for both emotional and physical intimacy. She even says, it is impossible to turn all this into art.
It's like she understood that life itself was a form of artistic expression for her. And this wasn't just some passing phase. She truly lived by those beliefs.
Oh, absolutely. And it wasn't just Edith. There were other women, and of course her rumored affair with Malcolm Muggeridge, who later became this famous journalist. He famously describes her as rosewater and raw spirit. What a description.
It really captures that duality in her personality, doesn't it? The delicate beauty and the fiery passion, both were essential parts of who she was, both as a woman and as an artist.
It really makes you think about how all those experiences, those relationships, those explorations of desire might have influenced her art. What do you see when you look at her paintings from this time?
Well, take a look at how she depicts women, especially in her paintings from the mid-1930s onward. There's a sensuality there, a certain intimacy in the way she captures the female form, particularly in those quiet, private moments.
It's like she's inviting us into this secret world of female experience, a world that, honestly, you just didn't see depicted with such honesty and vulnerability in art back then.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Think about Bride's Toilet, for example. It's not just a pretty picture of a woman getting ready. There's this incredible tenderness in the way she's painted, the celebration of the female form and the bonds between women.
It's such a world away from those stiff, formal portraits of women that were so common back then.
Completely. And it wasn't just about capturing their physical beauty either. Sher-Gil wanted to portray the inner lives of women, their strength, their complexities, their desires. It was a radical departure from the way women were typically represented in art at the time.
And let's not forget her self-portraits. They're like these powerful declarations of her own identity and sexuality.
Absolutely. Take self-portrait as a Tahitian. The way she uses color, the intensity of her gaze. It's both vulnerable and defiant at the same time. You can almost feel her challenging the viewer to see her on her own terms.
It's incredible to think that while she was creating these masterpieces, she was also navigating the, well, let's call it interesting dynamics of the Indian art scene at the time. And it wasn't always smooth sailing.
Not at all. She was a force to be reckoned with, constantly pushing boundaries, challenging the status quo. Her criticism of the Bengal school, for example, caused quite a stir.
Yeah, she called them stagnant, right? For clinging to a romanticized past. What exactly did she find so lacking in their work? It's not like she disliked traditional Indian art.
It was more nuanced than that. She recognized the beauty and skill of the Bengal school, but she felt they were too focused on replicating the past, not engaging enough with the realities of a changing India.
So she wanted more.
Yes. She wanted something that reflected the vibrancy, the struggles, the raw beauty of the India she saw around her. She was practically begging them to look at their own country with fresh eyes.
And that's what she set out to do with her own work.
Exactly. She wasn't content to just imitate the past. She wanted to create something new, a style that was both modern and distinctly Indian.
And she really went through a fascinating artistic journey to get there. You can see her style evolving so rapidly from those early influences of Hungarian neo-impressionism to the bold experimentation of her later work.
It's like she absorbed everything she learned, from her time in Paris to her encounters with ancient Indian art, and then filtered it through her own unique lens.
Let's talk about that evolution a bit more. You mentioned her early work was influenced by Hungarian neo-impressionism. What did that look like?
Well, take a look at a painting like Young Girls from 1932. You can see those neo-impressionist influences in the meticulous brushstrokes, the way she builds up these layers of color to create a sense of depth and luminosity. It's really quite beautiful.
And then there's that shift towards Gauguin's post-impressionism.
Hmm.
You can really see it in Self-Portrait as a Tahitian. The colors become bolder, the forms more simplified, almost like she's trying to capture the essence of a feeling rather than a realistic representation.
And this is where her use of color becomes really interesting. It's not just about aesthetics anymore. It's about expressing emotions, evoking a sense of place.
Like she's realized that color can be this powerful tool for conveying the vibrancy and the intensity of India.
Exactly. And this kind of leads us to what might be the most pivotal moment in her artistic development, her encounter with the Ajanta cave paintings.
Oh, those caves are incredible. Those ancient murals with their flowing lines and expressive figures.
Yeah.
It must have been like stepping back in time.
It had a profound effect on her. Imagine her standing there, surrounded by these centuries-old masterpieces, seeing firsthand the power of line, form, and color to tell stories, to convey emotions that transcend time.
It's like she found a missing piece of her artistic puzzle, a connection to her Indian heritage that resonated deeply with her own sensibilities.
Absolutely. And you can see that Ahanta influence almost immediately in her work. The flowing lines, the earthy colors, those expressive elongated figures, they all find their way into her paintings.
Paintings like Bride's Toilet and Village Scene are such perfect examples of this fusion, this beautiful blend of East and West. You can see the Ahanta influence in the figures, the overall composition, but there's still that modern sensibility, that boldness of color and form that makes her work so unique.
It's like she took those ancient traditions and breathed new life into them, reinterpreted them through her own modern lens.
And then in the last few years of her life, there's this incredible explosion of color. It's like she discovered a whole new way of seeing, of expressing herself.
It's the phase that art historians often refer to as her colorism, period. And it's truly remarkable. The colors become bolder, more vibrant, almost defiant in their intensity.
It's like she realized she didn't have to hold back anymore, that she could use color to its fullest potential to express the raw energy and emotion of India.
Exactly. Paintings like Red Clay Elephant and Haldi Grinders are like bursts of pure color and light. You can almost feel the heat of the Indian sun radiating from the canvas.
It's just tragic that she died so young, just when she was hitting her stride, exploring this whole new visual language.
It really makes you wonder what other masterpieces she might have created if she had had more time.
It really makes you wonder what she could have accomplished if she had lived even just a decade longer.
I know, right? It's incredible to think about how much she accomplished in such a short time. It's almost like she knew she was on borrowed time and just poured every ounce of herself into her art.
And that passion, that urgency, it definitely comes through in her work. You can feel it in every brushstroke. It's part of what makes her work so captivating. Even today, almost a century later, her paintings still have this power to draw you in.
It's true. She just had this unique ability to capture the essence of a moment, a feeling, a place.
And she wasn't afraid to experiment, to push boundaries, to challenge the way people saw India, both literally and figuratively.
Absolutely. And let's not forget, she was doing all of this while battling illness. Those last few years when her use of color became so powerful were also marked by declining health.
Yeah, it really makes you wonder if that awareness of her own mortality fueled her creativity even further. Like she had this well of emotion and experience that she needed to express before it was too late.
That's an interesting thought. It's like she was racing against time, determined to capture the essence of life in all its beauty and fragility before it slipped away. And maybe, in a way, she did. Her paintings are like these little windows into her soul, her experiences, her unique vision of the world.
And speaking of her vision, she once famously said, "Europe belongs to Picasso, Matisse, and many others. India belongs only to me." What do you make of that statement? A little bold, don't you think?
Well, it's definitely a statement, isn't it? On the surface, yeah, it might sound a bit arrogant, but I think it speaks more to the depth of her connection to India. You know, it wasn't just about claiming ownership. It was about expressing this deep sense of belonging, of understanding. She wasn't just painting what she saw. She was channeling the soul of a nation, if that makes sense.
It does. It's like she saw herself as this conduit, taking all these influences, her European training, her Indian heritage, her own personal experiences, and forging something entirely new.
Exactly. And that's what makes her legacy so powerful. She transcended those boundaries between East and West, between traditional and modern, to create a style that was both universal and uniquely her own.
And it's a legacy that just seems to keep growing stronger, right? I mean, her paintings are considered national treasures in India, and they're fetching these record-breaking prices at auctions all over the world. People are finally starting to recognize her genius.
It's about time. It really is a testament to the enduring power of her work, how it continues to resonate with people across cultures and generations.
So for someone listening who maybe is just discovering Amrita Sher-Gil's art for the first time,
Yeah.
what's the one thing you hope they take away from her story?
I think what's most inspiring about Sher-Gil is that she reminds us that art can be this powerful force for change, for self-expression, for challenging the status quo. It's not just about pretty pictures on a wall, it's about communicating ideas, emotions, experiences. And Amrita Sher-Gil's life and work are a testament to that. She dared to live and create on her own terms, and in doing so, she left this indelible mark on the world.
She was a true original, a rebel,
Yeah.
a visionary. And she reminds us that even a life cut short can still be a life filled with passion and purpose and extraordinary beauty. Well, on that note, we've come to the end of our deep dive into the incredible world of Amrita Sher-Gil. We hope this has sparked your curiosity and inspired you to, maybe seek out her artwork and explore it a little bit further. Until next time, keep those questions coming and keep diving deep.